I need to think of a better title for this talk than Realities and Misconceptions about Enterprise Applications of AI, ML, and Data, because it does not flow off the tongue. But thanks so much, everyone, for joining me for this session. In advance, I'm from Australia, so I say data and not data. I refuse to change this. This is Brisbane, where I'm from. It's sort of the state is sort of like the Texas of Australia as well. So if I say anything weird that you need me to repeat, please let me know ahead of time. Normally, I would also try to introduce myself in Portuguese, but I am not brave enough to do that. So please pretend. Completely unrelated to my talk topic as well. So normally when you do any events in Australia, you do something that's called an acknowledgement of country, and you acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that you're meeting on. So in Australia, these are some of the language groups and clans of Indigenous Australians that the land was stolen from. So you can see more of a map. And zoomed in, that's a little dot point for Brisbane, and there's so many different tribes and groups around it. Completely unrelated to my talk topic. However, next time you visit Australia, I really encourage you to look up more of the history of the place that you're visiting. This is something people always prepare to go to the beach, but they don't always prepare for this. But you'll have such more of a rich experience visiting Australia next time you do come if you look into this more. The other thing, so please join me on Slido. Things that will happen on Slido: number one, I'll ask some questions during this. Number two, this is where you can ask questions as you think of them, and then upvote them if you see other people's questions that are useful. So you can either scan the QR code, or if you just type in the hex key. People on live stream as well, you'll also be able to join in on this with the same hashtag. If you're watching this in the future, I'm sorry you can't join in. Please enjoy whatever plague and or world event is happening at whatever time you're watching this in the future. Now we've all worked this out, let's have a go at our first poll. So what are you looking forward to learning about in this session? So it's a ranking thing for this. You'll be able to see, I think one of the options I made is just miscellaneous Australian things on there. So this is helpful. So I do this talk, almost the exact same talk to business people a lot. And so it's the same talk, same content to different people, whether it's for technical or business reasons. And I also ask them almost the same questions here. So it's a good way of seeing how people go with this and what they're actually looking for. Starting to get some numbers in there. Welcome. If I click, maybe they'll keep coming. But yes, fantastic that this is number one, because this is a really key point of what we'll talk about today. So the real reason enterprise AI machine learning projects don't make it to production. Futuristic AI ML cases, always up there. How to get executives to give my AI ML project budget. Fantastic. When I do this to business people, it's how do I get my developers to actually do the project. So always different. Things about MLOps. And I think maybe one vote for unrelated facts about Australia. Oh, and if the QR code isn't working for you, by the way, anyone, you can just go to Slido and type in those numbers and it should work. Right, this is how I explain my resume as well, which is a weird diagram. But overall, I have a very strange career path. It's not normal, but it means I'm very well placed to do this. I don't know if you saw the slide at the start. My actual job title is Head of Enablement for AI, Machine Learning, and Data. It sounds like a very fake job title, but it's a very real job. And essentially, we've got very technical developers that work at Blackbook.ai, which is a consulting firm I work at. Very technical machine learning engineers, data scientists. And then people come to us with problems. So they're business executives. They've got no idea about anything technical. They just know they've got a problem. So being able to bridge the gap between these two groups is really important. If I wasn't as technical as I was, I wouldn't be able to know the right questions to ask. And then also if I have a lot of experience working in different roles in a business. I've led UX, I've led marketing, led analytics, done startup things. So it's like, if I hadn't had the breadth of experience across businesses to work out what people actually care about, it wouldn't make sense. So now I've sort of found myself in this middle zone where people ask me at events if I'm technical or non-technical, and I just reply with a shaky hand because it's sort of both. But that's why this is important. And I think this is also why lots of projects don't make it through to production. And that's just because there's not many people like me in functions like this in AI businesses. So there's not people forcing people to ask the right questions or getting the right answers or working out what they should actually sort out ahead of time. before they try to go into anything. So it's something I'm very hopeful for in the future as we see more, as someone that talks about diversity and inclusion in STEM a lot, this diversity of thought, I think, really will improve not only the technical outcomes of machine learning projects, but also the ethical implications of that. It really just does take people asking different questions to get to different outcomes. This is our normal office attire, definitely not at a gala event, but that's some of the team from Blackbook that I work with. And I have these down at the bottom because we are sort of cloud agnostic. We have partnerships with both Microsoft and AWS. I personally don't care how something happens as long as it happens. For a lot of people, if they're already running Azure, we work on Azure. If they're already running AWS, we work on AWS and then work it out between there. And that's just because there's so many different businesses that come to us with different things. One thing that's very easy for people to do is just to force people in and say, oh no, you'll do this specifically this way every time, even if it's not what they need to do. So a big part of what I'll talk about today is the idea of stewardship, which you're not familiar with the term. It's just about leaving things in a better place than you found them, especially with machine learning. It's a bit like finance where it just sounds much more complex than it is a lot of the time, or it sounds complex on purpose so that you can sell them more stuff. And I would say if you take anything out of today, anything you're doing with machine learning, just work out how you can, regardless if you do a project or not, just if you can tidy things up for them or at least give them better information about what to do in the future, you're really doing your part in that phase. And not doing stewardship is why we get bad policy, it's why we get bad legislation, and it's why we get bad top-end company decisions, because there's no one questioning things that are happening. Or a lot of my job exists because previously executives just didn't know enough to have a conversation without a salesperson in the room. So educating people enough so that they can actually get to a point so they can make an informed choice. I personally think that's what's missing a lot of in AI, machine learning, and other parts of emerging tech. So we'll go through it more, but really that's what I think you should take away from today, is just working out how to, in everything that you're doing, push that little bit more just to leave it in a better place than you found it. So the first myth, so we're talking about realities and misconceptions. So the first myth is that code is the most important part of AI, machine learning, and data science. And this is false because context is really important for all of these. So you really need to understand where that data's come from, the quality of that data coming in, even how it's stored in a lot of cases. I get a lot of people coming saying they would like to do something extremely emerging AI, but then they have SQL Server 2000 running somewhere in a back room. They're not ready. So it's not only working out what you've got to work with, but really understanding of how that all came together. Additionally, especially in Australia, where I'm from, and especially in Brisbane, it's really important to make sure that, so for consulting, you're always leaving it for them to pick up, or there's maybe support or something, but they need to be able to support it. So making sure that you're giving them something that they can actually hire people to maintain. If there's a region that you're in, making sure there's actually skills in that area. A lot of the time you've got a choice of a few languages to work from or a few different frameworks. Do the one that's going to be easiest for them to hire people that they can actually maintain it for. And this is a really big part of the context, because it doesn't just matter what the code is. Maybe it's the perfect thing, maybe it's the newest, fanciest thing, but they can't do anything with it. And the whole point is that it should work and should be able to work in production. So you really need to understand the whole context getting started. Another myth is that it's someone else's job to deal with UX and UI. As someone that's worked in UX, I've definitely seen this happen from a technical side, and as someone that's worked in technical side, I've definitely seen this happen going the other way. That's not how it should work though, because even if someone else has UX in their job title, the users should be at the core of what you're doing. Additionally, lots of people who go into UX, which is user experience, go from a graphic design background. So they don't know about data structures, they don't know about how you can optimize search. They'll just say, oh yeah, pop a search bar in, not thinking about all the things that need to happen in the back end for some information to pop up somewhere from that search bar, because you maybe don't even have it stored anywhere, so how can you possibly query it? So working with people and not just outsourcing it will get you to a better end goal. In practice as well, this is why the TikTok algorithm is really good. So on Instagram, they had the UX, and then they shoved AI into it. But on TikTok, the whole user experience is built around the algorithm, because you're only seeing one thing on the screen at a time. If you open up Explore page on Instagram, there's like 11 things that you're looking at. Could be anything. So all of the metrics, it's really hard to get the really strongly tied attribution, which is why the TikTok algorithm is so potent, and it's why it's able to be so scalable. But that's only possible because they thought about UX the whole time. And that's a really good example of it in practice. If someone at your company doesn't want to deal with UX, or they want to just do it as a sprinkle on at the end, like they would with accessibility, which is also not good. But it's a good way of showing why it needs to be integrated into the process. I get around this. I got so angry, I made a framework. Nothing says anger like colored boxes, but essentially I was getting really mad because I was stuck in these meetings and they got stuck in what I would call the Elon Musk zone. And this really is two this or that questions. So the first one is, are you talking about function or form? Because I do not care what color a button is. I mean, I do at the end, but like, it's not worth spending time on in a meeting. And if you let executives talk about what they want to talk about, it will be the color of buttons on a form thing, because they're only imagining about presenting the product at a meeting or something. They're not thinking about actually using it. So you really need to be able to ground people in what are we trying to do? How can we do that best as possible? The other side of this is remove negative and add value. Add value is the Elon Musk zone. So that's like flying cars, anything that's really exciting, anything that they think will give them a really good press release or something like that. But there's so many ways you can improve the user experience by just getting rid of something that's garbage in your existing user experience. So working out if you're just joining Excel spreadsheets for no reason, or if you're mailing a physical USB device, which does happen more than it should, just getting rid of that. So allowing people to bring it up to a 0 is positive, right? If they're just at negative 100, just getting it to a neutral level is really valuable. And this is where you'll get good enterprise gains. However, no one will want to talk about it. So you need to get really good at helping people to have that discussion before rewarding them with time at the end to talk about their flying car, flamethrower, tunnel of choice. Oh, okay, this skipped through. But according to Gartner research, what is the average proportion of AI projects that make it from prototypes to production in 2020? This is a multiple choice question. So it's actually 53%, and the year before this, it was only, I think it was 49% the year before. Things do not get through to production. Everyone thinks that they do, and everyone likes to say that they do, but they're not getting anywhere. I like people now clicking this, now that they see the correct answer. Fantastic. But this shocks everyone that I show it to you across the board, because everyone just, if you looked at the amount people talk about doing AI, it's way more than 53%, but it's just not actually happening in practice. Everyone, winners. And this is the myth that companies are good at moving from proof of concept to production. Yeah, they're really bad at this, honestly. And this whole talk is usually, when I do it to business audiences, they're complaining why their developers won't get it through to production. And when I do this talk with developers, they're complaining that their executives won't fund it through to production. So both realize the same problem exists, but each side just thinks it's the other one's fault. The answer is both, always. That's what we'll get more into. And a big part of this as well is that people think it's fine to just leave machine learning models on the shelf, and they'll be the same when you get back to them. It's like, oh no, we'll just do a proof of concept now, and when we're ready, we'll come back to this in 4 years and do the exact, we'll just pop that into prod. Just pop it in. That's not real. It might be the same for regular code, so if you leave normal Python code, it's going to be there when you get back to it. However, data is not like that at all, and this is a really big problem for especially machine learning models. I replaced this picture. This slide used to have a picture of rotting fruit, but it was just, I didn't like hearing people's groans when they saw it. But essentially, data is fresh fruit. The moment you put it out on the table in its nice, lovely fruit bowl, it just starts rotting and deteriorating because you cannot just leave it. And the best it will ever be is the moment the fruit bowl goes down on the counter. So the moment you put it there, it's great, and then just constant deterioration after that, which if you don't deal with, you'll never be able to get something into prod, or if you somehow do get it into prod, it will be rancid and rotten, so don't do that. And this is what model decay, it's a much friendlier graph, looks like. So it's just going down over time. A really good example of this is with, if you have something that's using salary data or house pricing data to predict something else, those two input variables will change wildly from year to year. So if you're still using that same input data and you're not retraining on new data, your model just decays over time. So even if you are running that in production, it's getting more and more misleading because there's a drift between what the model is telling you and what reality actually is. And that's really irresponsible just because it's not good. But this is when things get really, especially unethical as well. This is where lots of bias gets into the model that can then get quite bad over time for different groups of people. So the idea of stewardship, leaving things in a better place than you found them, is making sure you're having the hard conversations at the start to leave budget for this along with the project so that you can not only give them something that works now, but it's not just tunneling off into the abyss as the project goes along. And the key to successful enterprise level machine learning is MLOps. This is something some people may not have heard about, so some people have. How much experience do you have with MLOps? And normally when I do this in Australia, if anyone answers number 4, I try to give them a job. But Blackbook only hires people with Australian citizenship, so I'm very sorry unless there is a closet Australian in the room today. Cool, yeah, great. Number 1, perfectly normal. The first papers about this were only coming out in the last few years even, because a lot of the time people were just not doing it at all. Or what has also happened is now we're seeing so much more enterprise levels of this deployment. Problems are popping up that just weren't there before. It's the same thing when everyone closed down after COVID. And then when people started coming back into the office again, there were all these new problems that they just hadn't even thought about because they hadn't gotten that far into the process to get there. This is the same with machine learning. It's something that lots of companies are spending a lot of time figuring out because they're realizing now how expensive the problem is getting and how hard it is. Congratulations to the 7% that said heaps. Fantastic. And I don't know why no one's done it at least once. It's very polarizing. So with MLOps, you can quickly realize the value of your models and retain that value over time. So you can do something that works now, keeps working into the future, and isn't adding in extra bias over time. And this means that you're doing that responsibly, but you're also just doing a good job. It really does change the goalpost in terms of doing a good job, because before, if you were just looking at maybe the confusion matrix of outcomes, if you're looking at the accuracy of the model as a drop in time for that proof of concept, that used to be sort of the goalposts for doing ML in big air quotes. But it's so much more than that now, especially when you're working on big enterprise deployments of this. And this really comes up for Blackbook as well, because a lot of companies have internal data scientists and then they don't know anything about MLOps, but they've got all that domain and contextual knowledge about how to generate the initial algorithm that you can use for proof of concept. And then they just don't know how to deploy it at scale. So lots of the time people will come to Blackbook to deploy their model. So they're specifically coming to us for MLOps engineering just because it's very niche. It's often something they can't even hire people with experience for, even if they wanted to. And that's the other, as a side note to this, if you're interested in this, the best way to get better at this is to do a lot of it. Working in consulting is the #1 place to get that experience because you're brought in to do a project. So you're constantly doing this one at a time, like just after each other. Whereas if you're doing a normal job, you're doing all the meetings and the side things and there's less projects together. So if you would like to just absolutely get experience, I've never found a better way than just doing consulting for this. And another part of this is you can simplify the packaging, which is really helpful as well with consulting when we're trying to be able to package this to send over to the client, but even as part of the validation as well, you can get all of these automated testing. So MLOps is different to DevOps, but a lot of the really good practices that have come into DevOps, if you look at how much that space has matured, lots of the best bits, like if you're going through and picking out the nice parts of a trail mix, lots of those have come into MLOps and it is pushing through. And the idea of just simplifying this packaging as well and deployment and all of the different validation processes over time really helps your quality control. And this is something that people just didn't care about for a really long time. And it's something that finally, thankfully, they're actually looking at. And this explainability and observability is very important. One thing that is a common gripe of mine is that people only look to women for this. People just say, oh no, we'll outsource all of our ethical thinking to women. Fantastic. Or they'll just be like, Brooke, what do you think about the ethics of this? That doesn't work. You really need everyone to be thinking about it to improve and get things over time. Because I've done surveys as well and research of this because I had to know. And once again, everyone thinks it's everyone else's fault. So no one thinks the government should be in charge of it. No one thinks company directors should be in charge of this. And nobody thinks developers should be in charge of making sure models are ethical, which leaves exactly no one at the helm. So that's not sustainable. It can't be no one's job. So bringing it into MLOps brings it into processes that you can use over time to make sure it's just built into the framework, not only of your company culture and the way you conduct yourselves, but also in the way that you're actually shipping that code in the same way that you would for DevOps. All of those good, handy practices, checks and balances, forcing people to make their bed before they leave the house, all of those sorts of things that you do for DevOps, bring those in to make sure that you're actually getting the explainability and constant observability onto what that model's doing. So the chart before that had the retraining with the dips down, looking at how much it is actually dipping, are you checking that over time, what's your data like coming in? And this really comes back to reproducibility. So people weren't doing pipelines before. They were just putting data in, doing a single report, having a nice little table at the end for their results and calling it a day. But when you're doing something in prod for your users, you need to make sure that they're getting consistent results every time. So if you're putting the same data in, will you get the same inference out? What does that actually look like in practice? And it's one of those things that if you're just doing something that's like nice and neat with linear regression, somehow it's easier to do. But once you get to work on much more complex models that I'm sure you would have heard about in other sessions today, it gets much messier over time and the mistakes get a lot more expensive to fix. So the pipelines are very annoying the first time you do them and they get easier and easier every time. This link at the top is really handy. So Azure has a whole page on MLOps and there's all reference architecture diagrams as well. It's built in. They really want you to do a good job and it really is the cloud providers leading the charge on communicating MLOps, just because obviously they want your models to work correctly on their services so you're not thinking it's a problem with their servers. So look to your cloud provider of choice. And being able to deploy it for scalable inferencing. If you're having a global network of users with lots of load coming in, you need to make sure that for the consistency, in the same way that if you're putting the same data in, you're getting the same results out, but are you making sure that it's the same experience regarding different levels of people coming to use the model? Are you actually getting different load balancing tests and things that you would do as part of your DevOps processes? And the same thing, so you can bring your ML models along to your CI/CD pipelines. On Azure, it has an integration with DevOps, and it is fantastic. There's all sorts of other things. The GitHub actions that are a part of this as well, I really encourage you to look at these in your own time. They're fantastic if you're working with your ML team at your company as well, and you want to make sure if you can bring that out, or how best you can bring your code into this. Super helpful as part of those workflows. And the governance side. Absolutely no one likes to talk about the governance because the executives just want their nice report that they can send in for a press release or present somewhere. And none of the developers care about this because they're just trying to fix bugs. So the governance gets a bit lost in the wayside. And that's also why, even if it gets through to prod, it doesn't stay there because who owns this? Who's owning the data that's coming in? Who's owning the quality control process for the data that's coming in and how that's being stored? What's that actually doing over time? No one wants to talk about this. But it's a really big factor. If you know about glue work in tech, the governance aspect of ML projects is really important and no one does a good job of it. So the only way I've found to get people to care about this is by talking about cost management. Finally, there's a dollar sign involved and they want to be there. So if that's a struggle for you, just definitely find a way to talk about cost management as part of this governance process, as well as the total cost of ownership and the total ROI on it, and it will help people to care about something they should have cared about the whole time. Slide it. How confident do you feel when explaining technical concepts to non-technical audiences? Also, if anyone on the live chat can see me drinking this is a wine cup of water. I don't want to look like I'm just a wild 3 p.m. talk. All right. A lot of people at 4. We have some confidence. No one said 1 yet. Congratulations. Everyone's feeling good about themselves. And a big myth is that executives you're presenting to understand AI and machine learning and emerging tech. And this is a myth because if you ask them, they'll tell you they understand. So the myth is perpetuated by themselves. They have no idea. The problem is that a lot of executives have been saying they understand AI for 15 to 20 years and just nodding along. And then now it's getting to the point where the gap between what they claim to understand and what is actually happening is broad, but it's gotten they're so far deep into it, they can't ask for help now without sacrificing their ego. So they're sort of trapped there. And it's because they don't know, but they also don't really need to know. In Australia, as a company director, so this is when you're on the board of a company, you used to be able to get away by just saying, oh no, I don't understand that, and it's fine, but you can't say that anymore. You need to understand the implications of all parts of the business. And this goes for cyber as well as AI/ML. So they don't need to understand the tech, but they do need to understand the implications for tech itself. And that's really important if you're doing things, predicting anything with salaries for your company or predicting promotions or something like that within the organization. They really do need to be across that, as well as if there's any implications to the public or privacy implications of this, or something to do with how that's actually, even how you're collecting the training data for this. So they need to understand, and it's really hard to get to a point where you can explain it. I get around this by just absolutely keeping their ego at front of mind at all times. I have somehow got a talent for just educating executives without them feeling like they're being educated. And that's really important for this, because you can't talk down to people, because then they'll just completely switch off. And then you can't just talk at a high level, they'll never understand you. So you really do need to find the way along the way. The first thing I can say is always explain acronyms when you're saying them. It's just a good practice, and it will help them to ask better questions over time, because probably they've been sitting around with just acronyms for the last 10 years and they don't know what most of them are, and no one explains them, and now they can't Google it because there's too many results. They just got no idea. So be helpful and just assume that they don't know things, and then they'll ask you better questions over time that will actually make it so much easier. Another framework that I made because I was angry, this is how I explain model properties. And this became a thing for an Elon Musk problem. And this is because I would talk to lots of executives and they would want to do everything at once. But a proof of concept that's successful proves one concept. It's not proof of concepts, one. So to help people really narrow down on what they do want to do for a single proof of concept. Often what will happen, I run workshops with them and they'll get lots of ideas, and then I need to help them work out what to do in what order, or what to do first, or at least how to break it down. This is the best way I've found so far. So it's just 4 lots of this or that questions. So it's pretty easy, but it helps them to really narrow down in on what you're doing. And I really would encourage you, even if you're not working with machine learning, work out how you can make little things like this that will help you to drive conversation, especially if you're someone in meetings who doesn't remember to make time for yourself to talk, or you just get talked over. Or if you're managing a team and someone on your team is getting talked over, this puts them in the driver's seat because they're the one, there's checkpoints along the way and they can really bring it back for crowd control. So it is really helpful on that front. So is there a problem they're trying to figure out? So do they want to find the optimal solution, or are they trying to understand all the inputs that will influence the solution? Perceive is what it sounds like. So understanding something that's already happened, are they going back and looking at historical data, or do they want to be able to predict what will happen in future? Obviously, you can sometimes do mixes of these, but for a proof of concept, they really do need to focus on one thing and do it once well. So if you're looking at clustering, for example, in marketing, so if you're trying to look at clusters of customers and working out who's who, where that will go, being able to do this to perceive what's happening with their current user base before going on and predicting that for a new user, so important at getting their buy-in and getting all of the data actually working so you can get it running. This just puts little stops in them to stop them trying to get everything at once. Supervised and unsupervised I have in here just to teach them the words. It's not usually a choice because it's usually a matter of what data do you actually have, but that's why this slide is here, just to stop and pause, they make sure they actually get something. Same with structured and unstructured, because they will always answer both, but they won't have a quick and easy proof of concept if the data is just absolutely everywhere. So often at this point is when I'll talk to them about what their actual data warehouse is, or what they're doing, or if they do have anything on the cloud, or what's actually going on. It's just a good place to stop and talk about that, because this is where they tell me about the closeted SQL server that's running in the basement that they had not mentioned for the weeks prior. So this is helpful. And I realize everyone looking at this saying it's not actually part of the model. I'm fully aware of that. It's there for a different reason. And that's how this all comes together. So now I'd like to preface this case study by saying I am vegetarian, but the client engaged Blackbook to do some computer vision. So in an abattoir, which is where cows go to become beef, they knew from the paddock. So they knew which paddock each cow was in, and then a variety of processes that I refuse to research happen. And then there's this, they know what happens, so they know at the end of the variety of processes, they know which cow started at which paddock. Then there's this mysterious room called the boning room, which I refuse to look at. And then after this room, that everything is bagged and tagged, so it's the beef in bags with tags on it. And then they know exactly where that goes out to. So they know which wholesaler it goes out to, or which restaurant, or which supermarket. they know where that goes. So there's this mysterious orb in the middle called the boning room. And it's where they have carcasses coming on. They come on sort of rails through the top, and then they're tracked as they become cuts. So it gets into like big chunks of cow, and then they get variety smaller across there as they move through. So it starts as whole cow, ends up in bags of small pieces of cow. This is a vegetarian explanation of this. And it's really important to be able to figure out this missing link, because that was helping them to be able to show provenance, which is really wonderful as a marketing story to be able to show this is where your steak has come from. But it's also really important for food safety, because what happens is if there's some sort of food safety scare, they're worried about something not actually working, they have to recall all the beef. If they can't prove that this is the only portion that was as part of this, they have to get rid of all of it, which is incredibly expensive. It's also not sustainable at all. If you've sustained the life this whole time and then you've processed it, you've put all this time and energy into it, and then you just have to get rid of it all, obviously not good. So aside from the marketing thing, it's really important for this. So it detects the cuts of beef, it tracks it as it moves across the space, and it does association as well. So in the same way you would have it saved in a folder that's in a folder, you can see each little piece of beef, which cow it started at. So there's a hierarchical naming structure as well as part of that as it moves across. And it was trained as well on their specific standards that they already had for what each cut looked like. So just to go through an example of what this looks like, they wanted to understand the problem, which was really understanding the movement of what was through here. So they didn't need to find the most optimal way to cut beef. They already knew that. Their problem was that they needed to understand how everything was moving at the space and how they could attach that through code to be able to work out which beef started as which cow from which paddock. And the same thing, so they wanted to perceive what was happening, not predict what was happening in future. You'll notice this problem solution, perceive, predict, is sort of a double up. Once again, that's on purpose. And that's to make sure they're actually only trying to do one thing, because they will always want to do both. But this is just really putting the brakes on for their proof of concept. This is now in production, but this is how it looks like for the proof of concept. And it's unstructured because it's all this images and video, but it's supervised because they were annotated with lots of labels. So the company had really stringent quality control. I wish they didn't have an NDA, because they're a very highly regarded brand and it's really about quality for all of this, but they had really good documentation ahead of time about specifically what everything was, and they were really good with the labeling process because they knew exactly what they wanted to get. So that's how that all comes together. Another, it's just non-stop glamour. So Pipe AI is a product that Blackbook co-built with an engineering firm, and it looks inside sewage pipes to detect cracks. So what would normally happen is they put a CCTV camera inside the pipe, and then a poor junior engineer who's just graduated university gets put in a windowless room and looks at a sewage pipe all day, every day, trying to look for cracks. I can't imagine why humans not only don't like that and also are terrible at that job. So Pipe AI gets the same CCTV footage that has geolocation markers so we can tell which part of the pipe it is. And then it's trained on the engineering codes of practice so they can detect that there's a crack, but they can also classify it based on the engineering codes for different types of cracks and faults. And then there's also a prediction part of this as well. So if they're going to cut open an intersection to dig up a pipe, but there's a fault 2 meters away that will need to be fixed within the next 5 years, they can just do it at the same time. So adding a layer of common sense that was not there previously, as well as helping them do their predictive maintenance as part of that. Normally this is terrible because I have a video of the sewage pipe with sewage, but I gave myself the treat of not bringing that. Delighted to announce that it's happening for stormwater drains now. So I will finally soon be able to just stand in front of rainwater and leaves and not raw sewage on stage. Another case study that's really cool to talk about. So as someone that's dropped out of university for mental health reasons, I graduated my bachelor's, just to tell everyone, and then I dropped out of my master's. And looking back on this, there were so many warning signs that I did not need to be at university at that time. Every warning sign in the book. And then when you think about it, all of the data that they have on you, so they know if you're attending class, they know if all of these different things, how you're interacting with the online learning systems, if you're submitting things correctly, if you're submitting things on time, how that's all happening, all of your interactions along that process. There's so many data points to see who's falling off the rails. And turns out when you do that with machine learning, you can do a really good job of it. So it's up to 96% accurate in predicting course dropout, which is fantastic, because then if you can work this out early enough, you can intervene and actually help people. Lots of universities only find out that someone is dropping out of a course when they have in fact dropped out. and that's too late. So being able to get people ahead of time so they can actually fix it, fantastic. And it's something that isn't what people normally think of. A lot of the time people think of these really futuristic things, but these are 3 use cases that I wanted to talk about because they're really, who would think that a cow, like a butcher abattoir company, would have really high-end machine learning? They have really good MLOps processes for that. Same with Pipe AI, the MLOps processes for that are really good. Prior to this, people would literally send a drive in a bag, either in the post or they would drive it there in a car to get the data from somewhere to somewhere else. So being able to do that really well in practice. And then with this, for student mental health, being able to track what that looks like now for a cohort, but then what that looks like in future. This is a really good example of how model drift happens, because obviously just students change year to year because humans change year to year. There's different, people use technology differently as generations change as they move through, and people's just online practices are quite different. Obviously as well, due to COVID, everyone's usage changed. So if you're not constantly retraining a model like this, it's very important that it works correctly so you can find the most people possible that are at risk so you can help them. So it's a good example of why MLOps is really important over time. This I have in my, when I do student talks, but I thought I would bring it up here. You can do the Azure AI Fundamentals course for free. Sorry if anyone from Microsoft is in the room or the call. If you just sit one of these webinars, the exam is completely free for these 3 fundamentals, but there's lots of other ones. They tell you in the description that it's free. If you are interested in learning about AI, this is really fantastic. Additionally, if you are a manager and you have staff who are really interested in saying, I want to get a little bit of a head start with AI on Azure, this course is really good because it just teaches them so much about general model properties. I've also done AWS machine learning specialty, and it is really hard compared to this. This is a nice, easy breezy. They'll be optimistic after studying for this because it is quite attainable. So I would recommend for your staff, if they're interested, this is a really good place to start. Azure doesn't really tell many people about this, I think because they want people to still give them the $99 US. However, this is how I did my AI Fundamentals cert through this program because I didn't want to pay for it. Highly recommend as a side note for that as well. Did we get any Q&As? I like to leave this a bit open just because people, I can just talk about things forever, but I don't know what is actually interesting to people or if there's anything you would like to hear more about. There's obviously also other use cases if there's anything in particular you would like to know about. Oh, we got a question. Why do you think the value of the product, that the value to product is so low? Do you think that there is some sort of detachment between tech groups that usually know what AI takes time and resources and is never done? Yeah, this is because people had a vision when they would go to conferences and people would get up and tell them about some sort of AI model, so like AI model ABC, and then they would get into the mode that they're buying a car. So they would just get fixated on, I would like to buy an E-Class Mercedes. So then instead of thinking about what is the best model for my organization or for my region or for the data that we have available, they don't think about that. They're like, I would like to buy an E-Class Mercedes. So they just get down with saying, I want to find a reason to run this model at the company, which is useless because then the proof of concept obviously goes terribly because it's completely detached from their business goals. And then the developers are angry because they know it's not the right way to be doing it and it's not the optimal way to go in, and then that's not getting anywhere either. So what does that even mean over time? So it's just so detached from what's actually happening. And for both of these, even if it does go well, so say for example, they've somehow fluked it and the proof of concept goes really well, the executive then has done a big check in their brain saying, correct, I have done machine learning at the organization. I am Elon Musk. I can now go to the golf course and tell all my friends that my company is running machine learning. But they're not. They just did a proof of concept with the feasibility report. It's not incorporated into their product. It's not incorporated into their practices. And the problem is that people allowed themselves to get all that emotional validation and fulfillment with a feasibility report, which is nothing as part of this. It's not helping anyone. It's not solving any problems, and it's not doing anything. So as part of this, it's really important to just be able to get that going over time and work out what they're actually doing. And pushing for MLOps. So MLOps is really expensive in terms of how long it takes to do well. So a proof of concept could go for sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks, depending how hard it is. But to actually get those MLOps pipelines in practice and getting everything going, that can take an additional 6 weeks. So if someone, even if it's only like a 2-week proof of concept, just in terms of the billable time for work. So in their brain, they're thinking, oh, I can do 3 really garbage, quick proof of concepts for the price of 1 basic MLOps framework. So they just choose this thing that will give them the faster validation. Additionally, they're not thinking about the fact that doing MLOps once, like that's why it takes a really long time, because you're figuring this stuff out for the first time. Being able to figure that out at the start is really hard, and it takes a long time. But then every time you go to add a new model onto this in future, so much faster. And it's like the initial investment is done and moving past. So I think it's just hard to get people to pay for things they don't want to. And that's because they don't understand the value behind it, because they've been saying they understand for 20 years, and now they don't and have got no idea. So then why would they pay all this money for a service that they don't know about and they don't think they need? Additionally, they think as well that they shouldn't have to pay extra for it because the devs should just know what to do. But how would people have experience doing ML in production if they have in fact never done ML in production? So it's really important to help people get through that. Additionally, lots of companies think, oh, I have data scientists that work for me, can't they do it? But even though they're really good data scientists that have all this domain knowledge and they know a really good idea about what they're doing, they've never done this. It's not their job to do this. It's not what any of the training is for. Additionally, during the time that it would take them to learn and do this, you're still expecting them to do their entire job, which is not real. So you need to be able to educate people on how that actually works over time. And I think overall the answer to this top question is just helping people to understand all the things that they've missed in conversation for the last bit and then working out how to do it. And yes, the PowerPoint slides will be available. I have them exported, so I'll just drop them in the chat after this as well. Do I think that businesses understand that when it comes to AI/ML, the job is actually never done? See, the job actually being never done is MLOps as a concept. So if you haven't taught them about MLOps, they'll think in their brain, correct, check, I have achieved machine learning. That's when they think the job is done, because that's when they've said good job to themselves, and that's when they've told their friends at the golf course that they've done this, but it's not, and it takes lots of time over time, and it does take a portion. You can't be doing other tasks, so the opportunity cost of that is high over time. So if they just don't value this at all, they're not going to want to put budget into it now, and they're not going to want to put budget into it in future. So it's just hard to keep going, but it just comes back to finding a way to educate them so that they don't feel bad about not knowing something, and finding a way to make sure when I run workshops, the #1 outcome is that I want them to be able to have a conversation about machine learning without me in the room. So I'll get a call from them in like 2 weeks when like, okay, we finally met and we've got some really good ideas from the business that we knew were problems for all this time. We just didn't know how to actually solve them. Or they're saying, we've got 4 or 5 ideas, can you come back and help us know which to do first? That means they've probably had a conversation about this for the first time. They've just been thinking, nodding, saying, yeah, we should do ML, and then someone saying digital transformation in the same room and nothing's actually happening. So helping them to get this. Do I have any statistics on non-machine learning proof of concept projects getting to production? No. I can make some up for you, and just you can guess which one's correct. I can give some training data. We can improve the inference. No, I do not. I'm sorry. It's probably better just because DevOps exists. And usually if they're doing enterprise software, they've got at least someone, even if they don't have a department for this, they've got at least someone who knows the word DevOps in the organization. So I would say it's higher. Additionally, because people have been shipping code for a long time, they know what goes into it. And even if you think about the fact that there's QA processes and entire QA departments a lot of the time for this, whereas do they have machine learning QA? Or are they just expecting the same data scientists who are building the initial thing to also do QA for this? So it's just more about the maturity of the overall field and what that looks like in practice, I guess. Do we have any other questions? Someone can be brave. If you want to be extra brave, you can also ask it out loud. Everyone at once. Oh. What would be a good way to educate businesses about machine learning so they know it is not just about collecting data? Find products that they use all the time. So are they using in Google Photos where you can search for dog and it will show you all the pictures of dog, or you search for Paris and it will find all the ones tagged with that? Find products that they're actually using and then explain to them how they're working. So don't just say computer vision model or object detection. Show them what that actually looks like in something that they're using all the time, because then they'll just be confident with it and comfortable from the start. Because a big part, people get really emotional about AI, and emotions can range from scared to very angry or excited. So the way to really manage those emotions is just to ground that in their reality. So if there's a product they use all the time, there's really good AI features in PowerPoint and Word now. So usually if they are only working on that, or even in Excel, if it's guessing the formula that they're using or ways that it's doing predictions, being able to go to their level and explain in something that they're actually using, and then you can improve based on that. So you're giving them a much better, they feel safe to then take that little leap. If you just start talking about something that's completely removed from what they're doing, they're not going to get it at the end of the day, and they won't be able to ask you an insightful question back. On this note, you'll know that you've asked them or you've told them about something interesting based on the quality of questions that they're asking back. So not quality based on necessarily being correct, but just smart questions. Like in the keynote this morning when they were saying, oh, is the neighbor's power on with the toaster? Sorry, this is going to be very cryptic if you did not go to that talk. But if they're asking if the neighbor's power is on, that's when you know they've at least listened to what you've said enough to ask an insightful question based on this. So think about how you can nudge them towards better questions, which comes from them having more confidence, which is really important, and then a baseline level of knowledge about how to actually move through this. And that's why I have the frameworks as well, to really just push them towards a better, they can give themselves guardrails to have those conversations in a more safe way so they can then leap beyond that, because otherwise they'll be moving, but it won't be in a positive direction. They'll just be sort of darting around and not going anywhere useful. I like that this person was the only anonymous person as well. How to prove that the AI won't kill the humanity? Very carefully is the maths response to that. No, and it's really important. So in Australia, there's voluntary AI ethics principles, which means that absolutely no one uses them. And I did a full law assignment on the ethics of this, and no one cares. And this is when I did the research as well, looking at, do developers, like, do you think that developers should be the ones in charge of this and not, no one really thought all of that? Do you think that it should be executives? No one really thought all of that. Do you think it should be the government modeling, like monitoring what models? Absolutely no one thought that. So then who's actually in charge of this? And the government's saying, well, we can't really legislate this, so we'll give you some voluntary ethics things, which obviously no one uses. I asked people, and it was less than a quarter of developers even knew that these existed, because they don't market them or tell them they're not really incorporated into anything. Less than a quarter as well had even used it once in one project for their entire career. So just people had no idea that these things existed. And getting it across the board, and this is why it really comes down to a cultural thing across your organization. If you're just outsourcing all of the ethical decisions about AI to one person, first of all, it's not their job and they're not going to get promoted based on being the most ethical AI person. Second of all, if they leave, what happens? You need to be having these conversations as a group, because that one person is not going to be in every meeting and they're not going to be in every conversation. And the problem that happens is people just go for this and they keep going for so long to then just, it'll get so far gone and they're like, oh no, we can't change it now. We've already made all these decisions. And then it gets to sunk cost fallacy before they actually think about, oh, maybe we shouldn't make something that murders or discriminates. So it is important to do. What about the opposite situation? So you have budget, you're willing to implement AI ML in the area you're working, but there's also almost nothing that can be used for automation prediction. Yeah, this is why my job is AI ML and data, and not just AI ML. And this is because usually they need to do some sort of data warehouse modernization first. Because there's lots of organizations, if they have resisted digital transformation for a long time, like they have a prediction arm of their business, but it's just some guy called Kevin. Like that's not good. There's so many places, there's just this guy who knows, or someone that's like, this woman that's worked there for 40 years and she just knows the way the wind is going and she knows how much stock to order or she knows how to forecast things. That's not sustainable over time. It's also a lot of pressure on one person. So this does happen, and usually this is because they haven't been collecting data for so long. So they've just got no hygiene around this, or if they have been collecting data and it's just been garbage because they haven't been monitoring the quality of this over time, that's really tricky as well. So just working out how you can rely less on just Kevin out the back who's just making a good guess, which is probably pretty accurate. Just working out how you can actually get people to move forward usually comes down to some sort of data warehouse modernization. And usually Azure Synapse, especially if it's an Azure thing, if you can show people what they can actually do for this, especially if they tried to move to a data warehouse or data lake once before and it just didn't go well for whatever reason, showing them more about how they can actually integrate through. Usually if they've just held off doing it, it's because they don't think they need to. So this is a nice nudge to get people to make the decision they meant to make before. And then you'll get a much better outcome. Because as well, even if you're not working on the AI ML for this, regardless of what you're doing with the other data that's coming from this, as a developer, it will make your life a little bit easier to get all the other integrations and practices from that. Do we have any last questions? Regardless. This is how you can get in contact with me, from most to least professional, from LinkedIn to TikTok. It's a wild ride. Yeah, definitely, if you think of a question tomorrow, come and talk to me. I'm very friendly. I'm also doing a second talk on Friday now, which is how to become a tech conference speaker. So I'll be able to talk to you about that as well. I have a filter on my TikTok of which AWS service are you. It's one of those ones with like a quiz at the top. So you'll enjoy that as well. But thank you so much for joining me. It took me 57 hours of travel to come to Porto. It's also very excited to be here. So thank you so much for coming to my talk. And I hope you do not have a 57-hour ride home. Thank you.